This is really special for me because I do a lot of work in the US and some in Canada, but this is the first time that I get to publicly speak about this passion of mine in my hometown of Montreal. So thank you so much for coming. It's really meaningful to all of us. So I'm Stephanie. I'm born and raised here in Montreal. I now live in Los Angeles, California. I'm a neuropharmacologist. What the heck is a neuropharmacologist? Neuropharmacologists study the brain, neurology, and pharmacology is the study of how drugs act on the body and what the body does to drugs. And so I got really interested in traumatic brain injuries, and that was my catalyst into psychedelic medicine and psychedelic therapy. In between all of that, there were other working experiences. I worked in the hospital, I worked in corporate healthcare for Johnson & Johnson. But at one point, I became very interested in psychedelics through my own experiences. I think a lot of people in this field get inspired by their own experiences. And so my own experience mixed with this third wave of psychedelia, funding new research, emerging research, people in California, because California always seems to be the counterculture, talking about the benefits of microdosing and psychedelics. And I had this aha moment of, could psychedelics help people with traumatic brain injuries? Because after a head injury has healed, people continue to have symptoms, mental health symptoms like depression, anxiety, insomnia, sensitivity to light, even personality changes. Why is that? Is that because of the physical concussion or head injury? Not really. It becomes a brain network disorder, which becomes very psycho-emotional. And so I thought, could psychedelics help be more curative for all of these patients who are just living with, all of these symptoms for the rest of their lives and having to really accept that that's life now. So that's how I started. And with some time and research, I decided to found Beyond Consulting, which is my work, where I help a lot of physicians and medical directors get their clinics in integrative medicine off the ground. And that includes mental health, and it includes ketamine-assisted therapy, which is how psychedelics are practiced legally right now in North America. In other countries, ketamine is still regulated very much, but in North America, we have this ability to go off-label, right, and do injectable ketamine. And the FDA has also recently approved a nasal form of ketamine, which is reimbursed by insurance, which is really fantastic. So I'm going to get into a little bit more of all of this, but first I want to give you an overview of what's going on in the United States, because it's quite different than what's going on here in Canada. You can switch the slide. Okay, so this is breaking news. This just happened a few days ago, which is massive. So essentially, we are petitioning to change psilocybin from a Schedule 1 to a Schedule 2. So what that means is that patients could have better, more regulated access and faster as well, and also access right to try options. So that's really important. And the other thing is that in order to move policy forward, we need research. And it's extremely hard to do research when there's a backlog of applications for DEA licensure across the United States for Schedule 1 substances. So moving psilocybin and other similar substances from Schedule 1 to Schedule 2 could make research a lot more easier across the board. Next slide, thank you. Okay, so I'm gonna stand over here so I could actually see this because I didn't memorize this. So today, as I mentioned, S-ketamine, which is a version of ketamine, if you will, is approved for an intranasal application. And that needs to be done with special regulations to mitigate risk and safety. And it's done in a clinical setting. So a patient would have to report to the clinic, get medically evaluated and cleared, and then would be able to access this medicine. Off-label, we have racemic ketamine, which is a blend of two mirror images of the same compound. And that can be injected intramuscularly like a vaccine or infused through IV. And this, again, is also offered in clinic. MDMA-assisted therapy, I don't know if many of you have followed, but it made its way all the way to the FDA last year for approval. Unfortunately, it was rejected. I don't think, there were many things, but a big thing is that the FDA doesn't regulate therapy. And the model that was proposed was MDMA plus therapy, and it absolutely should be that way. but I think it really was difficult for the FDA to evaluate that. Not to mention that these are medicines that the FDA are not familiar with. So my personal opinion is also that we don't have the right people necessarily in the right roles. And so this is going to instill a lot of change. But a good thing is that a lot of money has been recently invested in veteran studies for MDMA. And so perhaps we're going to see a second coming. Is everybody familiar about how MDMA is being applied for PTSD? Can I just see like show of hands, just so I know who I'm talking to? Okay, all right, so people are pretty familiar. Okay, we can go to the next slide. Okay, this is really interesting. So in Oregon and Colorado, we have special access programs similar to Canada, except that these are done in specific centers. So in Oregon, you can actually go to a center. You do not need a medical diagnosis for depression, anxiety, or PTSD to be able to access these therapies. You cannot sell psilocybin, but you can have a small amount if you are 21 or older. And the Microdosing Collective, which is a nonprofit that I support with research, is actually advancing a microdosing bill in the state of Oregon. Currently, we've just started, but essentially what this would allow for is at-home use without having to report to the center every single day to do your microdosing protocol. Because microdosing is something that people want to do like a regimen. They don't want to have to go, report and see a physician or see a therapist. They want to include that in their daily wellness routine. And of course, if you can possess a small amount, then you might be asking yourself, well, why would you need to pass a bill, or why would it need to be part of the legal system? There are some people who continue to be uncomfortable with growing, or possessing on their own, and they want the guidance. So a bill like this would allow for a safe framework that's in between independent use and therapeutic use. In Colorado, you can use, possess, and gift, but you cannot sell certain amounts. And Colorado also has healing centers. So these centers are a little bit more therapeutically oriented. Typically, you will go and see if you qualify for the therapy. You don't necessarily have to be treatment-resistant depression or have major depressive disorder, but you have to demonstrate a therapeutic need for the medicine. Go to the next slide. Okay, so in New York, fully illegal. But there are a few bills that are being pushed forward right now to legalize medical use, to regulate the framework for adult use, including cultivation. And there's a new bill that's also been proposed to remove psilocybin from the state banned list as well, which would be extremely helpful, again, for research. And then in Texas, I'm not sure if many of you have been following, but the former governor, Rick Perry, has been an absolute champion for ibogaine. Are you familiar with ibogaine? Okay, so iboga is a plant from Western Africa, notably from Gabon. It's a shrub. You can cultivate the bark, you can make a tea, you can make a paste, you can encapsulate it. There are these different ways that you can use it. And ibogaine is the active compound in iboga. And so Rick Perry is really pushing for legalization for veteran use to start, and hopefully that will expand with time. I'll go to the next slide. These are all of the cities, counties, and states where psilocybin is decriminalized in the US. So it's pretty cool. At the same time, I think it's pretty odd that there will be counties inside of states that have decriminalized, but the state itself, like if you look at California, there's about 6 places in California, but the state can't seem to pass a bill. So it just goes to show that there's a lot of work still that needs to be done. Okay, so that was my review of the US landscape. But today what I really wanted to talk to you about was women's health, because there's a huge opportunity in women's health with psychedelics, not just as a pharmacological agent, but also with psychedelic-assisted therapy. And so I'm gonna start off by saying that 1/3 of clinical trial subjects historically have been women. That's not the majority, that's not even half. And up until the 90s, women weren't even required to be in a clinical study. And so that's left a lot of gaps in our understanding of female biology. These conditions affect women way more. And you can think of it because of gender roles, you can think about stress, but what it really comes down to is hormones. We are very unique in our biochemistry. Our hormones fluctuate tremendously through time, and women find that a lot of these transition points like puberty, premenstrual disorders, pregnancy, postpartum, perimenopause can be very, very challenging. And it's not just physical symptoms, it also affects our mental well-being and our mental health. We can go to the next slide, thanks. All right, so we're twice as likely to develop PTSD due to factors like sexual violence and trauma. Go to the next one. 2/3 of Americans over 65 with Alzheimer's are women, and that is also very much due to the fact that as we get older, our estrogen starts to dip. And estrogen is a neuromodulator, but it's also a neuroprotector. And so as these levels dip, we become more at risk of neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's and dementia. 78% of autoimmune diseases are women's. And this is our reproductive timeline. And why I'm showing this to you is because we don't really talk to women about their reproductive timeline until something is actually happening, right? Until something is wrong. And so the point of this is to show you that there is many, many opportunities starting at a young age to inform women, to inform our daughters, to inform the people around us about these transitions and what to expect. Not from a place of fear or anxiety, but from a place where we can have agency and preparation to ease these transitions and help us feel more prepared. But it's also to inspire us to have a seat at the table, because medicine for women is not going to change unless we are there to have our say and our word in it. So psychedelic medicine might invite us into something new. And I'm not saying this to say that psychedelic medicines or therapies should replace Western therapies. Absolutely not. These are tools in the toolbox. We have incredible medicine, but we can do better. And so here's an opportunity. So as some of you might know, our estrogen ebbs and flows, rises and falls twice. And when it's low, for example, in our luteal phase, sometimes we experience mood disorders, sometimes we experience fatigue. Some women it's very, very unnoticeable. Other women, it's debilitating to the point where we have syndromes like PMDD, where women can actually feel suicidal before they get their periods. And this also can happen during perimenopause. And I'm saying this because research has recently shown that there is a relationship between estrogen and serotonin. And serotonin is the target of many popular psychedelics, like we know, LSD, MDMA, psilocybin, mescaline. Many of these act on our serotonin receptors or regulate serotonin in our body. And the other reason I'm saying this is because the intensity of our psychedelic experience, per this recent research study, has shown that it could actually lead to better clinical outcomes. So if there's a relationship between serotonin and estrogen, and we know that estrogen can sometimes dip low, could it be possible that a psychedelic that boosts and bolsters our serotonin could also boost and bolster our estrogen levels? And the answer is yes. So serotonin system sensitivity is really important for women. It is the most important neuromodulator in our bodies. And oxytocin is also really important. I'm going to break down their roles in the next slides. So estrogen increases serotonin receptor density. So that means that there are more receptors available for binding. So if you take a psychedelic that is very serotonergic or serotonin forward, there are more receptors available for binding, which could actually lead to a larger, more intense experience, which could make you feel more sensitive based on where you are in your cycle, which could lead to a bigger experience, which could lead to better clinical outcomes, but it could also lead to more vulnerability, right? So if we're feeling very sensitive and that critical window for learning is open, we need to make sure that the stimulus, that the support that we're getting during that window of opportunity is the right support that we need. Because in that vulnerable time, in that critical period, if the information that's coming in is not supportive, it could actually go the other way and it could be more dangerous. And that's especially important with someone who might have suffered PTSD or trauma, who is trying to heal. That person can become re-traumatized and actually regress. Oxytocin is also a big part of this healing mechanism. So MDMA and some other psychedelics stimulate oxytocin release, which is our hormone of bonding. And this is one of the reasons why MDMA is extremely successful for couples or for people who have PTSD, who are struggling with trust, struggling to love themselves, to accept themselves, and to move through these challenges. Oxytocin can help two people bond, right? When mothers give birth, that oxytocin has a big, big boost, helps with bonding with babies. So the same kind of concept here when it comes to a client and their therapist, or two partners in a romantic relationship. So oxytocin plays a really important role here. All right, so ketamine. Ketamine is really interesting. Ketamine is not a classical psychedelic, but it produces a psychedelic experience, right? And what's really interesting about ketamine is that it's legally available, as I mentioned. And with the practice of psychedelic-assisted therapy with ketamine, we're able to produce that psychedelic experience, but we're also able to work on our glutamate system. And our glutamate is a neurotransmitter that plays a role in depression. So a lot of patients experience a very, very large boost in how they're feeling, in their energy, in their mood after one single treatment. Now, don't be fooled. It's not just one and done, and it's not a silver bullet, right? You need more continuous work. But because of these low levels of glutamate in certain regions of the brain, we have an opportunity with ketamine here. And we can switch to this next slide. So this is a really interesting women's study that was done, and it was a group of about 600 women who gave birth by C-section. And they did it in C-section because women who give birth by C-section don't have as much of that oxytocin and serotonin and the neurochemical cascade that happens in women who give birth naturally, vaginally. So they selected a group that is more at risk for postpartum depression. They split them in two. One was control, one got ketamine, and they only got one dose after they gave birth. And that group did significantly better when it came to developing symptoms of postpartum depression. And so now we're trying to think about, is there a way to even have ketamine be a preventative treatment and not always propagate this system of reactive medicine? Wait till the thing is broken to try to fix it. Let's try to get ahead of the curve. Let's try to be well before the system breaks down. So ketamine can also help with PMDD. So PMDD is a very severe form of PMS. It's premenstrual dysphoric disorder, and declining levels of estrogen during that luteal phase could be a contributing factor to PMDD. So again, there's a relationship here between estrogen and this psychedelic. Ketamine activates the estrogen receptors and can even increase estrogen levels. And I'm currently at the clinic that I'm a director at right now in LA, we are currently treating someone with PMDD using ketamine-assisted therapy, forms of acupuncture, mindfulness, and nutrition. And I'm just really excited to see how she does, because the literature has been pointing us towards this topic, but not a lot of people have had the opportunity to actually put it to practice. So some use cases for women's health and psychedelics that are being studied. So MDMA-assisted therapy for sexual trauma and pelvic pain, ketamine for postpartum, psilocybin for end of life, and that's also men and women, PMDD and psilocybin, microdosing for hot flashes, and microdosing even for perimenopause. So in New Zealand currently, Dr. Suresh is actually studying microdosing of LSD, and incredibly in New Zealand, you can take the microdoses home. So you don't have to report to a center, a hospital, a clinic of any kind. Your treatment could really mimic real life, which is really important. And we're excited to see what these results show. So I'm gonna finish by just speaking about some important points here when it comes to research and challenges in research. So we need to include more women, because historically, we haven't had a lot of women in these studies. Women are not small men, right? We have our own unique bodies and biochemistries. The other thing, though, is that these hormonal fluctuations that could affect the outcome of how we respond to these drugs is not really factored in. So we're not in a trial, we're not looking to see where is a woman in her cycle. Is she on hormone replacement therapy? Is she on birth control? We're not really studying that. And so that's an opportunity that we have to seize. And then the other thing is a lack of diversity. Just because we have men and women, we're not of the same ethnicity, we're not of the same background, socioeconomic and cultural backgrounds. Just because a psychedelic works for you doesn't mean it's going to work for them. And the history of that person, both, again, socioeconomic, psychological, and even cultural, can play a role. You can skip these. Next. All right, so this goes without saying, right? You can go next. So this is what I would love for the future. This is my vision. So more personalized psychedelic medicine, more personalized medicine in general, hormone-aware treatment protocols that really factor in where a woman is in her cycle, because clearly there is a relationship between how these drugs work in our bodies and our hormones, and then more inclusion of female physiology. The other thing is that a lot of these disorders, challenges, they don't just affect the physical body, they affect the spirit, they affect the mind. And the opportunity with psychedelics is to also address that spiritual, that existential piece of medicine that Western medicine fails to address. And this is me. This is how you can reach me if you have any questions, if you want to ever chat about clinics or women's health or blasting off into space and exploring yourself with psychedelics, and I'm in for all the conversations. Thank you so much for your attention. I appreciate it.